Have you ever considered the possibility of whenever or not things were made out of free will? Or maybe it was simply some unknown entity that allowed you to do it.
Cuvântul să-l depună înscris la Secretariatul Congresului.
That perhaps we are constricted to our own reality, and as such we are not making choices based around freedom of thought, but instead due to how our circumstances are.
私、またわかんなくなっちゃって。私がいるの、こっちなのか、そっち側なのか。私、そっち側のどこにだっている。それは知ってるの。だって、繋がっているんだもん。でしょ？
Serial Experiments Lain for many is that of an enigma, an alien show, but also a quite dreary show, very episodic center and quite slow in terms of its pacing. But beyond its flaws, it does contain a plethora of different ideas it wants to explore. I would also like to clarify that this isn't a fear, but rather an explanation of the similarity the show holds towards something you're most likely using right now to watch this video. It is important to note that Serial Experiments Lain hints strongly at both technology but also experiments associated with Lain. Essentially, this structure is similar to that of an operating system. And to be able to understand how that is, it is important to understand some of the events that occur in the show, to get an understanding of Serial Experiments Lain's structure and how it is similar to that of an operating system, or really the moving bits in the God's machine. The first clue to this being the case is if we look at Lain and how she is something more than a normal girl. This would be how her perspective of reality keeps on bending and causing numerous hallucinations. This is to highlight both Lain's rather unique position she is in, but also show how she experienced the reality around her. This is because the wired and the real world is ever so increasingly merging with each other, and Lain is actually a non-human born out of the unconsciousness of humanity in the wired world. However, the Lain everyone gets to experience in the real world is merely a projection of both what Lain wants, to experience humanity, but also in a way making her ready to face her real role in life, because it's through her experience as a human she understands to a degree what she is and what she wants to do. Of course, every perception of Lain is different from person to person. This is because every human being has their own reality. This itself causes Lain to be the center of all, good and bad, that is happening in both worlds, due to her mere presence, influencing the world around her, and this will come into importance later on. Due to this unknown power Lain wields, she is capable of at least taking direct control of the wired world and manipulate the real world to her liking, even going so far as to be able to reset the real world and in essence going back in time. However, the more she learns not only about the world and the capabilities of herself, she starts to naturally question her own existence, and it gets to a point where she completely isolates herself. It's from here my first point starts, because now that Lain is at her lowest, from out of nowhere a Deus Ex Machina event happens. She suddenly sees her father pop up quite literally, even after supposedly the wired and the real world is now separated between the two. From this alone I would argue that perhaps Lain and her father don't live so separately after all. Perhaps it's because the real world isn't so real after all, or rather is just another layer inside the machine. It's from this realization that it's possible to see in more fine detail how the real world and the wired world is structured the same as an operating system, and overall the serial experiments Lain universe is similar to that of a computer. While it doesn't go into details of how an operating system works, such as the operating system's architecture, serial experiments Lain do take the same basic concept of how most modern operating systems are structured, in that it is structured in kernel space, user space, the internet and administrator, and of course the user. In essence, the real world is something called the user space. It's where all the programs are allowed to be executed in memory. This is to make sure that programs don't access the hardware directly, but instead communicates with the kernel space, which has direct access to the hardware. This in contrast is how people in Lain interact with each other, where everything they do is on a local level, and only sometimes do they communicate with a higher up layer of society, essentially the government. However, once the wired world was born, extended and popularized, suddenly you got these programs not only communicate with themselves on a local level, but now on a wide scale. And this is how the internet has made programs evolve into more sophisticated programs, capable of sending data and receiving data to other programs across networks. This concept is the foundation of what serial experiments Lain is based on. It's where it does its own experiments, so to speak, and of course where Lain comes into the picture. Throughout the series, you may have noticed that people overall doesn't seem to act very human-like during the show. Part of it, I would imagine, is perhaps due to some production problem when Triangle staff were making serial experiments Lain. However, another part of it, I would argue, is actually intentional. We know that Lain's family isn't just a bunch of spies tasked with spying and analyzing Lain, but a genuine family with at least one daughter. So why would the family overall be so odd towards both each other and Lain? Well, it has to do with what a program is tasked to do. What I'm talking about is how a program is designed to do certain tasks and certain tasks only, and the out-of-place and sterile communication that Lain has with others certainly makes the exchange feel like it wasn't made between humans but instead abnormal beings. To further explain it, there is a manga who fully showcased this abnormality, Soil. Within Soil, there is a family who seems to have no faults, which normal humans has. Always happy no matter the situation. And that can be reflected in serial experiments Lain, where we get to experience firsthand when someone's shell, or rather their code, gets reset to a default state and slowly becomes a corrupt program. In episode 5, Lain's sister, Mika, starts to experience the real world quite different than the rest. The climax of this is her seeing herself acting as if nothing happened, but then cuts to Lain seeing an abnormal spectre-like being which later fades away. Of course, this is simply to show Mika being a victim of the wired world. But if you could be dissected and have her own consciousness be ripped out of her so easily for merely sticking her nose into something she shouldn't have done, imagine what else the Wired is capable of doing. But this incident also shows a similar concept in how user space programs can be modified without any permission, and in theory can have viruses insert itself or simply just reduce it to a barely working state. Or you could simply exploit the program in question by taking advantage of a bug in the code and then have that program leak code into the space it's being run from. Lastly, there is of course Lain. In essence, Lain is the user of the computer, or the god if you will. In computer terms, she would be the administrator of the computer. And through the show we see her knowing more about what she is capable of, and as such we can see that she is clearly well beyond a mere creature, with her being able to reset the real world. There is also the ending, while being intentionally ambiguous, regardless whenever or not Lain is within the real world or the wired world, is irrelevant, since the point regardless would be that she would be able to control the world similar to how the user of a computer has ultimate control over its machine. So what does all of this mean? Well, this leads us to the big question. Perhaps the whole world we live in is just one big simulation, or better yet, is just one small mechanized world made and governed by our creator or creators. We would be something similar to that of a computer program, where we may think we have free will, but in reality it is only an illusion, and instead we are limited by our own reality instead of being able to have an omnipresent perception of reality and not obscured by our own reality. In a way, that is what Lain is also trying to symbolize, a being capable of having an omnipresent perception of reality, just like an administrator who can access area of the computer no other user or program can. For Lain, or rather for us humans, being able to have such a wide and all-seeing understanding of the world will be as if you were a godlike being. That's it for this video. Thanks everyone for watching, hope you enjoyed the video and see you all in the next video.